Thank you, Hillary and Zlata, for opening us today in such a beautiful, settling way. And thank you to everyone who is here with us today. It's so exciting to be together. Some of the stories that will be highlighted today have been integral to the work of the task force, and I'm familiar with them, and others are brand new because so many of you have been doing amazing work using SE to bring help and healing to the world in Ukraine and other conflicts and other situations around the world. And so we're really excited to have a space today to just open a space where we can share, connect. And our vision when planning this, we had the image of a campfire. What if there were a way that we could all be in the same place together and just sit around a campfire and exchange stories? So that's what today is. We really look forward to a relaxed, interactive, I hope, conversation. And we have a number of SE students and SEPs who have signed up to share their stories. But we hope with each session, we'll be able to have at least some time for Q&A. And you can put your questions in the chat, or when it comes time for Q&A, you can raise your hand icon. And we really hope to continue to maintain this beautiful feeling that has been started here with us today. Thank you to each of you for the work that you've been doing this past year to assist all around the world. Our first speaker today is honestly one of the most inspiring people that I have met over the last year in my work as the crisis response coordinator for SCI. Imke Hansen is I'm looking for my notes. Down here. Okay. Imke Hansen is a scholar of East European history and an SEP. She's been working on the front lines of the Ukraine war since 2015. And until the escalation 12 months ago, she was based in the Luhansk region of Eastern Ukraine. In 2020, Imke switched from being an academic to full-time field work. She works in trauma-informed crisis response and peace building with the Berko Partnership for Human Rights and Vostok SOS. Imke, thank you so much for taking the time to prepare some notes, some thoughts, some reflections to share with us today, and for taking this keynote address spot for us. We're really excited to hear from you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming to this event. It's really heartwarming because it's a topic that I have spent all year in, and just seeing so many other people who are still interested in it, who are still wanting to contribute to it, is really nice. And I will share some of my thoughts. And I hope we will have time for questions and answers. And I really hope for more inspiration and discussion when I hear your stories, because I know my stories, right? I tell them to myself and to others all the time. But I'm really curious about your stories. So my story begins with the polarity that the war creates. Like what I feel very much like right now in the last couple of days is that war just creates polarities and radicalizes those polarities that have already been there. And this is creating conflicts. This is making people feel offended. That is resulting in unnecessary escalations, in discrimination, in inner immigration, in all kinds of things. However, where there are polarities, it also gives us the opportunity to pendulate, which is one of our basic principles. So what I would like to do today is I would like to invite you to pendulation. And I can just see that someone is asking in the chat if there's going to be a translation into Ukrainian or
We
Russian.
have translation starting at 8:30 with Maxim's panel, but we don't have it before that. I'm so sorry.
Okay. So whoever is interested in what I'm saying and cannot understand English, I'm happy to share my notes later, and then you can just translate it through DeepL, and you will more or less know what I've said. So I would like to invite you to pendulate with me a little bit, and pendulate through four and a half fields that were really important for me as an SE practitioner on the front lines, and that were really, really challenging for me in practicing SE in war-affected Ukraine, but that are also principles of SE. And these fields are connection, curiosity, self-regulation, and feeling safe in like one point. And the fourth one is boundaries. I am not only representing my own experience, I'm also representing the experience of many of my colleagues and of our volunteers. I'm blessed to have an initiative that works with me on in like soothing stress and integrating trauma for war-affected people, and also for people affected by migration, forced migration, not only from Ukraine, but also from Belarus. It's the Phoenix Initiative that was founded with the protests in Belarus 2 years ago, and that has that just dived very deep into Ukraine and developed a whole Ukrainian program in the past year, and I'm very grateful to all of my colleagues and all of our volunteers and all of my clients who shared stories, who asked questions, who actually provided me with everything that I'm going to say today. So I'm starting with connections. Connections, and the polarity, of course, is disconnections. And disconnections actually govern the landscape of Ukraine right now. So bridges are blown up, roads are hardly passable, checkpoints stop you. And actually having like a front line running through your country is a grave form of disconnection. It separates not only territory, it separates very much people. Women and children have fled to safer places. Many have fled to neighbor countries or just like other countries and are not in Ukraine anymore. Others are internally displaced persons within Ukraine. Grandparents often stayed where they were in territories that are now occupied. Husbands often live there where they can work, or they are in the army. Friend circles are scattered throughout the country, or also abroad. So you have a huge amount of disconnection. And within that disconnection, you can also feel, or I felt in the past year, that Ukrainian society seemed more connected than ever before. As you know, I've been already working in Ukraine for a couple of years, and I found it's really amazing that people were helping to each other, helping each other to an extent that was not seen before. People were like, neighbors were connecting as it became more and more difficult to satisfy your everyday needs. People connected more and more to support each other in satisfying those needs. And a really like an image that is in my mind when I think about that are these collective kitchens that came up in front of apartment houses, were built up by the people who lived in the apartment houses when there was no water and no electricity. You might know these pictures from Kharkiv region of people building right in front of their doors, like the door of the houses, improvised kitchens where they were cooking together, hanging out together. You had very elaborated, very nice kitchens. There was a great variety of kitchens. So every house community had a slightly different kitchen. And that was, for me, this is until today, like really a symbol of people joining and connecting through actually like a means of survival. They want to satisfy their needs. They want to survive. They need to cook. They need to eat. But through this surviving response, there comes connection. And that is rare. Usually, like, our survival responses are disconnecting us from others, putting us into fight, flight, or putting us into freeze. But these kitchens are another example. People were also connecting a lot digitally, like families and friends remained connected through messengers and video calls. Fathers who were in the army could watch their children running around and growing up. So people gathered in channels, in Telegram channels, and often in channels grouped by city. So the people of Mariupol have several channels, like people who are now in different parts of Ukraine, but they come from the same city. They actually connected to each other in forms of channels. Digitally, people also connected a lot through fun, having fun, sense of humor. And there's this phenomenon of memes, of like short, funny pictures, videos that are flooding the social media. Ukrainian social media is just so full of it. So people were laughing together, although being physically separated. And of course, laughing contributes not only to connection, but also to self-regulation. So people connect together, they survive together, they self-regulate together. And my friend Sophia told me she's a big fan of memes. She's always like, she's sending me the good ones. Without memes, I would not have survived. So you see how closely this is connected, like these jokes, and connecting through these jokes is connected to survival. In autumn, the digital connecting became more difficult because from October 10th, Russia has bombed infrastructure, energy infrastructure throughout the country heavily. And ever since, there are power interruptions everywhere in the country. I just talked to a colleague who's in the very west, where you don't have any shelling or bombing, but still, she says, in the office, we have about 2 hours of electricity per day, right? So without power and internet connectivity, people cannot be in touch with each other as they were before. And also, we in Phoenix, we felt that a lot, because people could not attend our trainings, our support groups. Clients would drop out in the middle of a process. So we had to come up with all kinds of things that you could do when I drop out, when you drop out, when we lose connection. And this was really interesting. Like, how can we remain connected when we lose connection? So what I was usually telling my clients is, okay, when the connection is interrupted, you just keep orienting, and you try to orient until I'm back, or until you just feel really well oriented, and then we can switch to chat. Maybe that works, or do something else. My training with caretakers from Cherkassy and has been postponed several times. They're waiting for it since 4 weeks, but every Friday when we want to meet for the training, they either have a power cut, or they have an air raid alarm, and they're sitting with the children they're taking care of in the basement, where they do not really have the possibility to join a training because they don't have access, and that they also have to take care of their kids. So actually, in our work, in the work of Phoenix, and in my life, and in the life of all our beneficiaries and clients, infrastructure is and power cuts, air raids, even if you're not there, are very, very much determining your day, your way of working, your way of connecting. Even though there is a general tendency of helping and supporting each other, many people, of course, have disconnected to parts of themselves and to others. I often hear people say, yeah, it's horrible things happen every day, but we got used to it. People also tell me that they got numb, and they see it, but they see it as something kind of normal. So it's very rare that people are actually curious enough that they want to explore this. What is this getting used to? Like, what is that mechanism? And it's important. I consider it important to do it. So we tried to do that over Phoenix, that we're connecting with people and connecting people among each other, facilitating peer support, and inviting them to discover. So we motivate people just to be with each other and do something really normal together, like cooking, knitting, just being together. An example that I really, really like is from Kherson. I was in Kherson like about 2 weeks after Kherson was liberated in November, and we met a volunteer, very active person in civil society, who said, so when the shelling and bombing of Kherson becomes very heavy and we become afraid, we gather with the family, and sometimes neighbors are also coming, and we're singing. We just sing, and we sing as long as the heavy shelling continues. And this is so beautiful. I said, wow, do you even know what the neurological background of it is? Because you're like prolonging, you're connecting with people, you're having this resonance through the all the voices singing together. And you might remember what Dan Siegel writes about, like letting people sing together, and you have your own resonance. You have like a permanent voo sound inside you, and you're prolonging, you're stimulating your parasympathicus by prolonging your out breath. And they didn't know it. They did it just intuitively. And this is really giving me hope. And I'm so happy about these examples when I meet people who are intuitively doing things that regulate themselves and regulate others. We will get back to that a little later. One of the challenges in our work is that these concepts, like concept of discovering where you're dissociated or disconnected, or the principle of self-regulation, is very unusual for most people. They grew up with a paradigm of separation of body and mind. They grew up with the belief that physiological symptoms you have to cure physiologically, means like with medicine, with drugs. And even if they have the idea that their symptoms might be stress related, there is little curiosity on how one could actually mitigate them apart from with pharmacology. I think this is because people often perceive it as a weakness. They like seeking support, seeking like the help of a psychotherapist is seen as a surrender, right? You give up, you cannot do it by yourself, you show your weakness. And this is very like, this is something of a very low moral value. There's this belief, it's one of the first sentences I learned, like, man should solve their problems by themselves. And this is not only applied to men, this is applied to everyone, like solve your problems to themselves and make a good impression to others. This is something so many people think and have in common. And this harmful stereotype meets a contemptuous attitude towards psychotherapy, which roots in the Soviet Union attitude to psychotherapy. Seeking support or allowing for support thus seems to be the last choice, seems to be what people do when they cannot stand it any longer. And this paradigm provides us, like Phoenix, with people who are highly stressed and highly traumatized. And we often wish that a person, a client, had found us a couple of weeks earlier. So what we have to do usually is just a lot of stabilization before we can just start to think about any kind of processing. many people come to us, like join our training groups, because they want to learn how they can help others without harming others. And this is, they are then very surprised that what we teach is how you can help others without harming yourself. I mean, of course, also without harming others, but that it is a lot about yourself, and you learn a lot through yourself and through your own body. A lot of people tell us they feel completely sane, they have no trauma at all, they can stand it all very well. They just want to be fit for helping the children. Like, helping the children is something that is morally really, really good in Ukraine, as basically everywhere. So helping the children is often this, like, the facade that is presented. And then people come, and they come with all their vulnerabilities and with their anger and with their hope. And very often the training process then turns out very, very beautifully. So actually, this is not anything that that I would not appreciate. I mean, people come with whatever motivation they come, and we even adapted, or we learned to adapt our trainings. We're not doing trainings saying like, we're going to do group therapy with you. We're not saying to people we're doing somatic experiencing. We're saying we're giving a training in how you can help others without harming them and without harming you. So we're trying to pick people up where they are and offer them something they can take without feeling shame, without feeling guilt, and without feeling like singled out in society. Our first step in these trainings is to awaken and feed curiosity. So we have this comic. It should lie around here somewhere. I'm going to show it to you later because it's like out of reach of my arm. We have this comic that is called I Can, and you can find it on the SE Material webpage. But we also have a pretty playful approach to training with games and surprises. And the more discovery people actually experience, the less we talk and the more discovery people experience, the better it is. I had a training in Chernihiv, which is in the north, right at the Belarusian border. And this was an area that was occupied in spring. And it was a training in the Human Rights House. And this is a house I really like. I've been training there for years, even before February. However, when you looked out of the window, all around you, just ruins. It was so, like, the territory was so signed by the war that it was actually difficult to contain in that space. And that, like, it's a beautiful training space, but all around us was just destruction, landmine, warning signs, and things like that. So it is really difficult when you are surrounded by death and ruins and signs of that. It is really, really difficult to make people feel safe, at least a little more than they do when they come. It is difficult to contain, and it is difficult to awaken this curiosity. And usually it takes 2 days before people actually can be more curious. And the first 2 days, they want methods, they want instructions, how to apply these methods. They might find the embodiment exercises weird and the game silly. They try to theorize everything. So what they do is they try to take in the cognitive and keep away the embodied things. And this is a very, very usual reaction from my experience for people who are feeling unsafe in this environment. So on day 3, I don't know why, but usually on day 3, at some point, curiosity kicks in. And this is not this like intellectual curiosity of asking questions and wanting to understand things. It's more an all-encompassing curiosity. It's a curiosity that allows people to really discover and to really like sense things or observe people. Observing is also, I realized that observing is a huge taboo. When I tell my the people in training that they should observe each other, this is like, oh my God, no, people are observing me is bad enough, but me observing other people is like horror. I'm not going to do that. So you see that a lot of things that are necessary for SE, for learning to support your natural self-regulation and for finding islands of safety, a lot of things that we use are difficult already in a like a normal society, and even more difficult in a war-ridden society. So so what are we doing these 2 days where when curiosity is not really there? So what we do is we spend 2 days with the opponents of curiosity, of course. As you know, stress and fear are the major inhibitors of curiosity. And in a daily life determined by air raid alerts, impacts, and power cuts, of course, stress and fear are like constant guests in almost everyone's nervous system. However, there is another counterpart of curiosity that I personally find more difficult than fear. And this counterpart are like fixed themes of thinking, like man should not cry, you should not offend others, your behavior could offend others, you should not show that you're afraid, the world should do this, this should not be like that. All these like expectations, categories, and labels. And the misunderstanding that freaks me out most is the mixing up of vulnerability and weakness. So for learning to find islands of safety, for learning to support your self-regulation, you need at least to some extent to be with your vulnerability. But being with your vulnerability, and even more showing your vulnerability, is perceived very often as admitting that you're weak. It's something that you know all anyway, but you shouldn't show it to others. And admitting that you're weak is something already difficult in a peaceful society, but in a society that is at war, in a society that boosts values as strength, braveness, fearlessness, selflessness, masculinity, and coolness, I find it really difficult to convey these messages, like to convince people of like allowing to be in touch with their own vulnerability. There's also a lot of people who think that they collapse when they get in touch, when they only allow to be a little bit in touch with their vulnerability, that the whole vulnerability will come over them and they will collapse. So they really use their energy to push back. So I'm coming now to the third field, which is safety and self-regulation. And it's always difficult to speak about safety in my context because we're working in an unsafe environment. I cannot provide people with physical safety. It's just not possible in Ukraine. If I was training only in a safe environment, I could not access a huge part of my target group. So yeah, we work in unsafe places, and the more it is important to create these islands of safety, and creating it in very different ways and very creative ways. And what is also very relevant is that you really support people in self-regulation. And this is also something I find really challenging. As I already said, many of our clients and participants have great trouble to observe not only others, but also to observe themselves. It's an alien concept to them that you should observe something that is going on in your body. And I mean, every one of you knows it. You probably can resonate with most of the things I say, just that I find that in a war context, this becomes even more challenging. So in a work context, in this context where anytime someone could call and request help from you, many think that they don't have time for any regulation because they need to act immediately, right? And my response to that is usually like in a situation where you really need to act immediately, you don't even think about it because your reptile brain has already taken you and made you act. And if you can think whether you should regulate now or not, you're in the perfect moment to regulate, because that means that your reptile brain has not taken full control, and you can regulate for a short while. So whenever you think regulation is not a good idea, this is the best moment to regulate. I was working with a team of people who were doing evacuation. They are evacuating people with limited mobility. This is like people of age, people with disabilities, people right after childbirth. And they're evacuating them from dangerous areas. They can be subject to shelling anytime. And, you know, like people with limited mobility, they have to carry them. They have to like put diapers on them very often. Like it's a process where they have a very long exposure in a very dangerous area. So they are the whole day under adrenaline, the whole day. And I asked them, like, how do you calm down? How do you regulate yourself? And one of them was like screaming a millisecond later, like drinking. And this was a joke, but it was also the truth. And not only for them, but for many, many helpers who at the end of the day choose a beer or something else to stimulate their sympathicus, because it is just really difficult when you're in constant activation, which is good because you are actually working in constant life danger, right? It is really difficult to allow for the parasympathicus to kick in. Other people, not from that group, but from a different group, they said they just pretend to be cool. They pretend nothing has happened, like fake it until you make it. So they pretend they're cool as long as they need for really feeling cool. Other people, when asked how can they support the regulation of others, they're saying like, yeah, they have to distract them. Very often this comes when I ask, like, how do you support children who cannot regulate? And they said, like distracting them or telling them that it's all not so bad. And you all understand that this is not the ideal way to support a person in self-regulation. And I find that, like, what we do in somatic experiencing is somewhat like counterintuitive in current society. So this is not exactly what many people come up with, but it's really important. And I just want to tell you one story from a recent training that really struck me. So I was training a group of sports trainers, like basketball trainers, who in Kharkiv, who want to do a program for helping children. And it's great. They're really motivated. They're really nice people, and they really want to help the children. And then we were talking about the nervous system, and we were talking about how important safety is. We were talking about self-regulation, all these things. And then we had the Q&A session. And one of the participants said, yeah, I have a case that is really difficult for me. It's a child. Like when we line them up for the next game, that boy always wants to be in this like position number 1. And when he cannot be there, when I tell him to go to the last place of the line because other children also should be in this place number 1, then he's like screaming and acting wild, and he's this is a very pampered child that is allowed to do anything at home. And he always wants to be the leader, and he always wants to be on place number 1, and he wouldn't calm down whatever I do. And when I listened to that, like the first thing was when I listened to a description like this, I don't want to work with that boy, right? Because like a boy really pampered, cannot get always gets what he wants, always wants to be a leader. It doesn't sound really sympathetic. And of course, I also heard the activation of the sports trainer telling me that he has a group of people there, and then one kid is freaking out, and he has to control that person, because otherwise the whole group will start freaking out. So I said, let's we're working with this metaphor of SE glasses. So let's put our SE glasses on, and there's one glass through which we can see whether the person is safe, whether the person feels safety. And I said, does that kid, in the moment when he explodes, does he feel safe? I said, no, he probably does not feel safe. So, okay, so let's turn to the other glass. The other glass is, does that child make the impression that she can regulate herself right now? Said, does that child look as if he can regulate now? He said, no, not at all. That's the problem. He cannot regulate. Said, okay, so a person who doesn't feel safe and cannot regulate needs, of course, support in feeling safe and regulation, and does not need to be put in a place, like excluded from the group, put in a place that is against his will and also against what he's used to. Maybe he can just not tolerate something he's not used to. And he said, yeah, but if I do that, if I just ignore him, at some point he's quiet again, and he wouldn't make any terror the whole until the end. And then we talked about that quietness, and of course this quietness is not regulation, but is resignation. And again, the child made the experience that when he's screaming and crying for help and support, he doesn't get that support. So this is such an innocent story, but it's like everything is in there. Like what I'm learning in my work, like the most important thing is self-regulation for myself or for the trainers who are doing it. Like when I'm not regulated, I don't even have to come in and do things, because this decides about everything. If the guy who was doing the training, if he was regulated, if he didn't feel so challenged by that boy, the whole situation would look different. And the other thing is, just don't look at people with your like normal glasses in terms of how much are they fitting into your plan and how much do they annoy you, but really try to be in SE glasses while you work, with asking whether that child feels safe and whether that child can regulate right now. And I think time is coming to the end, right, Melissa?
Correct. We have 23 minutes left, so lots of time for Q&A if you would like.
I'll just like round up, and if I have 5 minutes for rounding up, that would be nice, and then I'm open for Q&A. So another topic that really plays a role in this story is, of course, boundaries. And also my work in the past year made it so clear to me how much self-regulation and boundaries are actually connected. And I see like boundaries is probably one of the most difficult topics in the communities of helpers and volunteers. And this is, I'm not only speaking about helpers and volunteers doing psychosocial support, but helpers and volunteers in general. One has to say that civil society in Ukraine is so powerful. I would have never expected it to become so active and so powerful. It's really great. Like so many people, almost everyone I know actually everyone I know, I guess, are helping someone, are in some initiative, and even people who are helping in their jobs. Like I told you about the people from the evacuation team. And what are they doing on weekends? They're driving to the fully destroyed villages with dog food and cat food, and they're feeding the animals that people left behind when they were fleeing or dying, right? And there's so much solidarity and so much kindness that this is really impressive. This is very impressive, and that also provides a lot of stability and a lot of resilience for society. And there's this other side of helpers and volunteers who are so absorbed in their mission that they do not see their own boundaries, that they violate their own boundaries. And as you know, when you violate your own boundaries, you're also prone to violating other people's boundaries, to taking too much responsibility, to manage things for people instead of support people and being like in having an impact themselves. So this is a really interesting mechanism that the helpers I talk to, I work a lot with helpers, and the helpers I talk to, they say, yeah, it's like I can never switch off my phone because there can always be an emergency. And right, yeah, if you know that people call you when they really need help, when there's really an emergency, it's really, really difficult to switch off your phone at night. Even if this is, I mean, but people will then just also call when it's not a super emergency, but this is another thing. So drawing your boundaries, that was also something what was the biggest challenge for me last year, and I did not always manage it so well, I have to say. So what is connected to this boundary question? I experienced that boundaries is very, very close to the question of guilt and shame. So people feel guilt or shame or both, that they do not do enough. Like everyone is talking about that. People who fled to another place feel guilty that they're not in the other place to help, and people who are in the army feel guilty that they cannot help their family at home, and people who help in evacuation feel guilty that they cannot also like support their family. I mean, everyone finds a reason for feeling guilty for something, and this is totally excluding me, right? I felt very often guilt and shame that I could not do even more. So this feeling of guilt and shame is really like a killer for your boundaries, because you are doing whatever people ask you, whatever emergency you can jump in, you do jump in, with the illusion that you might feel a little less guilt or shame afterwards, which is not true. Like, you don't do that. So boundaries and how you can take care of your boundaries is a difficult topic in teaching, because people are so committed to help, and I like that. I mean, it's really good that they're committed to help. Without this committed civil society, Ukrainian society would not be in the state it is now, because many things that usually a state offers, like evacuation or coordination of humanitarian aid or organizing shelters for handicapped, for people with disabilities, this all is on civil society. So this is all on our colleagues right now, and it's necessary that they do it. But I also know that they do not do it only out of joy. They have very different motives. One of the motives I hear often is that people tell me that they've never felt more useful. They've never felt that they are doing something that makes so much sense, that is so important, that they really contribute to the survival of other people, and that is really filling them with sense. And this is also something I say when people, like, sometimes when I meet strangers and they understand what I'm doing, and they say, oh my God, how can you do that? That must be really difficult. I said, yeah, it's difficult from time to time, but also it makes great sense. Like, I feel that my life makes sense. So I know what a beautiful feeling that is, that my colleagues and other people are talking about, that, like, yes, I'm tired and I'm at the edge of what I can do, but at least I know that I'm useful and my life makes sense. And the other thing is that like, when you're permanently helping, like you're permanently waiting for a call or calling someone else, you're permanently in this activation, you're permanently on adrenaline, it is really difficult to get off. It is really difficult to say, I'll take a break. It is physically painful. I experience that when I go back. Sometimes I go back to Germany for a couple of days, or to Poland when we're having training in Poland. And I'm getting out of the train, and I'm like, in Ukraine, I'm not feeling anything. I feel like fit usually, and I can do whatever I want to do. I get out of the train. I have difficulties to get down the stairs because my knees are hurting so much. My back is hurting. Like, when you get off the adrenaline, everything starts hurting, and you're like paying the bill of 2 months not feeling that pain, because it is even stronger. So people are telling me actually the same. They say, oh, I feel best when I'm helping. I feel best when I'm working in a war zone, when I'm doing all this stuff. This is just when I feel best. And this is what I would like to end with, that there's just a lot of people who who come from a background that was difficult and who have trauma in their life. And this trauma gives them now the superpower that they can help and volunteer and support. But this trauma also does not give them a choice whether they really do it or not. It's such an imperative, it's such an attractive thing that you very often have the feeling that you don't really have a choice. And there's one person who was also in the evacuation in Bakhmut, also working together with our colleagues. And I think that I met him at the train station of Pakrovsk, where the evacuations are going on. And I was there just to take care of the evacuation team, look if everything is all right, like just connect with them, regulate a little bit. And I met him. He's a US American. And we were just like talking about who we are. And I introduced myself. And I was saying, like, I'm like helping traumatized people, and not only beneficiaries, but very often also the volunteers and helpers. And he said, yeah, we're all traumatized. Isn't that why we're all here? And this was such a wise sentence, and he knew about that. And still, he undertook a pretty dangerous mission a little more than a week ago, trying to save patients, where he and his fellows in 3 ambulances were shelled, and he died on the spot. So this is also something I learned, that we shouldn't underestimate the danger, but you cannot really manage the danger with keeping away from it. You have to manage the danger inside, and you can manage the danger inside even when you're close to places of danger. And I think this is what we're doing. And this is also what Phoenix does. We're working wherever it is necessary, and we're trying to support people in managing the inner safety and managing the inner danger. Thank you very much.
Imke. He was a friend of friends of mine too. It hits very close to home. I often think I come from the world of international development and emergency response too, and monitoring and evaluation is such a big thing in our world. And I would imagine that you are able to some degree to measure the impact that you've had in your work in Ukraine, but I wonder if you know the impact that you've had on the SE community by being out there. Sorry, I'm not very regulated at the moment on SCPs. Every time I talk to Imke, just the few conversations we have, I feel like I'm in a master class about how to navigate the complexities of these situations, the depth of the wisdom, and all that you've been learning in your time in Ukraine. This is how I feel each time, Imke, but your stories that you've shared today ring true. I'm getting messages here and messages on my phone. And I thank you. I thank you for vulnerability, and I thank you for the time you put into preparing really thoughtful remarks today. I have a list of questions that I would love to ask, but I'd like to do an uncomfortable pregnant pause to see if there are people in the audience who would like to actually take precedent and ask questions. You can put your questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand icon. And if not, I have lots of questions for the next 10 minutes that I would like to ask.
And Melissa, after the event, could you give me a copy of the chat, because now all the people are writing how wonderful I am, and I would like to put that like somewhere in my bedroom so I remember it when I'm in a bad mood. Thank you.
I would be very happy to, very happy to. Let's just wait for a moment. We can have these quiet spaces in the SE world, I've learned. Yeah,
it's really difficult when these messages are popping up all the time. Oh, need to read them later.
Take a moment to read them. Okay, if there are no questions, then I get to go. I get to go first then. I have so many, Imke. One of the things that I've been learning in my conversations with you is that there's different phases to the experience, that what you were dealing with from a trauma perspective and on February 25th looks a bit different than as things go on. And people here today are working at all different phases of helping people who have been through conflict or in active conflict now. Do you have any reflections on how things have changed over the last year? I know you've been in Ukraine since 2015, but what are some of the cycles or the ebbs and flows that you've seen over the last year?
So the first 4 weeks were horrible, and I don't even, I was completely dissociated. I remember only fragments of the first 4 weeks. And the only good thing I remember was that my neighbors, I was not in Ukraine in the first 4 weeks because I was on the 24th of February, I was on holidays accidentally. If I knew what was coming, I wouldn't have gone on holidays, of course. But so my neighbors here in a very, very remote village community, they were just coming in, cleaning the kitchen, bringing me wood and bringing me food, and not even trying to talk to me. And that was the best thing ever. So this was like the first was this super emergency phase, and I think that was the same with me and with others. It's even difficult to remember. And then there was a phase of just like we have to build up all these processes, and we have to get all this money and all these resources, and it was a phase of a lot of connection. So we were connecting with each other. I had like 1,000 of new contacts in all kinds of in like fire departments and everywhere, and people were connecting to do something together to help and mitigate. And that was actually also a very like challenging phase, but you felt a little bit like a cowboy or something, like some kind of a hero, like someone who's really doing a lot of things. And I also saw that with others, that in this like phase of organization, when grants were coming in and donations were coming in and we were getting so much support, that was easier to take. And then of course we also got used to a lot of things, but for some reason I think like in August, like late August, again was a phase that was emotionally so draining, as draining, like we just said, maybe even as the first couple of weeks, where it was really difficult, where conflicts were coming up, where things were just in generally for no super apparent reason, they became really, really draining and really, really emotional and very tiring. And I think this phase stopped latest on 10th of October, because 10th of October, as I said, the infrastructure shelling, like this intense shelling of infrastructure began. And this is really like that marked a new phase of the war, because we were busy reorganizing our lives. Like every time you have an air raid alarm, you have this question, okay, am I going to go to the metro or to the basement, or am I not going to go? Usually you don't go. Then it's like, well, I don't know. I remember it was like 6:30 in the morning, and I thought, no, It's so early, I don't want to go. And the next thing I woke up from was an impact that was not very far away. So this is like, okay, I guess I get up now and take a shower because it's not clear whether we're going to have hot water later. And I went, and also the shower doesn't have a window, so it's nice to be in a shower when there's shelling because you can't be hit by glass. And this is just my observation, but this is basically what everyone does. Like, okay, am I going to go? Am I not going to go? If a lot of things were hit in Kiev in the morning already, then we went to the metro and tried to work there, stood around there. Then came the time when we had to organize generators for ourselves. We had to organize ovens. I learned the Ukrainian words for a lot of things that I have never talked about before. So it was all about like this infrastructural thing. And you learned how you cannot control your life at all. Like it was not that you were a slave or something, but just the fact that you cannot control when there's power. And when there is power, you have to do the things that need power, like you need to do some work things, send emails, and so on and so forth. And when there's no power, you have to do other things. When there's internet connectivity, you have to do this. When there's no phone connectivity, you have to wander around the town and look for places where there is connectivity. It takes so much time to organize your everyday things. That was a really change, and I've never before experienced such a phase. And I think most people around me of my age and younger have never experienced such a phase. And what was really interesting is that like transgenerational knowledge came up. Like my grandma used to do this and that, right? So we don't have only transgenerational trauma, we also have transgenerational resilience that very much came into practice when we had to learn how to live without power, without water, without heating. We were discussing, like, I mean, I have a like a hot water bottle always with me, and we were discussing how you do things. Also, you always had to have a head torch. You couldn't, because even in daylight, you couldn't go to the toilet without a head torch because toilets don't have windows. So it's really difficult. You really change your lifestyle. And this was also the case for everyone. And again, it was this like, whoa, okay, we're going to make it. We're going to fight. With every bombing, the donations of Ukrainians to the Ukrainian army were having like a peak, right? Like every time they said, whoa, we're going to bounce back, and you will see that because we support our army. So also this like communication with the army and cultural products. There were a lot of songs coming out, a lot of memes. It was culturally a very rich time, a time of like really high connection. And actually it was very, very, very tiring, but still it was somehow, it was great. Like in Chernihiv, I was teaching that training where we had 3 hours of electricity and the rest without electricity. So we were teaching with a head torch or in the almost dark, or we kind of found solutions how we can provide ourselves with a little bit of light and a tea. And we did a lot of orientation. It was just great. You adapt to these things, and it's also a very positive feeling that this, like, yes, I can adapt. You won't destroy my day. And now I see that there is again like a more, I think we're when you see it as an activation curve, right? It's going more up into the activation or more down into the dorsal vagus. So things are becoming more draining and more laden, conflict laden. Like there's difficulties within the NGOs. The donations are not floating in as they were last year. We have to structure, we have to change. So now I perceive as a more difficult phase with the differentiation that I've spent the winter or most of the winter, like the January, in safe conditions, and I spend it with a lot of therapy and supervision and just walking in nature. And now I'm here with the plan, okay, this year will not look like next year. So now I observe it more with colleagues, and I try more to I tried to support before, but now I can really concentrate on just regulate yourself and then support the others, regulate yourself again, and then support the others.
That leads to the final question of our time then, which someone asked, which is, what are some tips or ideas of what you've done to be able to help? How do you survive emotionally is being asked. And I guess I am wondering, what would you say to others who are in it for the long haul like you are?
You have to be able to ask other people for help. And this is the most important thing. And this is also the most difficult thing when you ask me, but it is really, really like asking my team members for help. My colleagues just say, hey, I'm having a difficult time. Can we talk? That is important. I think most of the things, it's like trying to sleep at least like 7-8 hours a night and not consuming any coffee or alcohol also helps me. I think being connected to yourself while you're being connected to others in such times is the most difficult and still the most supporting thing. Wow. And I mean, there's hundreds of things we do all the time, like funny things, tasty things. I can write a book. Whoever wants tips can approach me directly, and I'm happy to exchange and give you like 800 life hacks how to stay like happy and joyful during a power cut or an air raid alarm. It's no problem.
You just took away two of my favorite resources, though. Coffee and alcohol are what I would be turning to. So I'll have to talk with you later. Everyone, thank you so much. We are putting lots of words of encouragement in the chat, and I'll save them and compile them for you to have with you there. And I would really like to say thank you, Imke, the example that you are for our community of how SE can be applied in war zones and in active war zones. And I think we all know that the work that we do isn't just for once the trauma has resolved or once the conflict is over. We can in real time be helping people in the midst of crisis too. So I thank you so much for being with us today, for sharing these reflections. And a dream of mine has just come true, which is that we would create space for you to talk to your fellow SEPs and SE students through the task force today. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you to all of you. And I think that most of the things I said are so familiar to you. You all know these clients who would not be able to observe themselves, or you find silly what you're saying. And so, you all know it. So I think my experience is very much integrating with your experience, just that we're like trying out things in a different environment. It's a little bit like when I'm teaching my dog to sit down in the living room, it doesn't mean that he can sit down outside in the forest. And I think it's a little bit like this. So what you're doing, doing in your garden, I'm doing somewhere in the prairie, like a little bit. But after a little more learning, the dog can sit.
Excellent. Everyone, we are going to transition into a 7-minute break. Actually, our beautiful friend of the task force and faculty member, Liane Pinto, will lead an SE activity here in the main room if you would like to stay with us for a few minutes, and then we'll have a few minutes of quiet before we begin our next session with Rachi. So you're welcome to stay and do this activity, or you're welcome to step away for the next 7 minutes, and we will resume at 1:30 Thank you.